High above the spiral arms of the galaxy, the great station of the Galactic Oversight Council turned slowly in the void. Its crystalline walls stretched for miles, housing the most powerful beings in known space. For 10,000 years, these 12 elder species had watched over younger civilizations like farmers tending their crops. Arbiter Zexthora of the Veltar stood before the massive viewing screen in the central chamber. Her 6 eyes moved independently as she studied the latest reports from the Outer Rim. Each document told the same story that had been repeating. For centuries, another young species discovered, evaluated, and either guided toward enlightenment or contained until they proved worthy. The process was simple and had never failed. Young civilizations always followed predictable paths. They developed tools, then agriculture, then industry. They fought wars, made peace, and slowly learned to work together. Eventually, they reached for the stars with crude rockets and primitive radio signals. That was when the Council stepped in. Another monitoring request, announced Keeper Mordek, his tentacles sorting through data crystals. A small blue planet in the outer spiral. Third rock from a yellow star. The inhabitants call themselves humans. Zexthara barely glanced at the file. Standard evaluation protocol. How long have they been transmitting? Roughly 50 of their years. Radio signals, mostly entertainment and communication. Nothing concerning. Mordek's voice carried the boredom of someone who had seen this same pattern thousands of times. But observer first-class Yelneth had been studying the human files more carefully. Her species, the Kethmori, were known for their attention to detail. Something about these humans bothered her. "Arbiter," she said, her voice careful and measured. "I recommend we look more closely at this species. Their development curve is unusual." Zexthara's primary eyes focused on the young observer. In her 3 centuries of service, Yelneth had never questioned standard protocol. Explain. They achieved powered flight and split the atom within the same century. They went from first flight to leaving their planet in less than 70 years. Most species take 3 to 5 times longer. Yelneth pulled up holographic displays showing human technological progression. Look at their wars. Each conflict drives innovation at rates we've never seen. The viewing screen filled with images of human history. Cities burning, then being rebuilt larger than before. Weapons of terrible power being created, then turned toward peaceful uses. Again and again, humans faced destruction and emerged stronger. Mordek waved a dismissive tentacle. Aggressive species often develop quickly. They usually destroy themselves before becoming a real concern. That's just it, Yelneth insisted. They should have destroyed themselves decades ago. They created weapons that could end their entire civilization. They've come close to using them multiple times. But they always step back from the edge. They learn. They adapt. They find another way. Zexthora studied the data more carefully. The young observer was right. Humans had invented nuclear weapons. And then, instead of destroying themselves, had turned that same technology toward generating power. They had faced global environmental collapse and were already developing solutions. Every crisis seemed to make them more innovative, not less. "Show me their space development," Zexthara commanded. The display shifted to show primitive rockets launching from Earth. Zexthara watched humans land on their moon using technology that was crude but effective. They built space stations that grew larger and more complex with each generation. Most interesting of all, they had begun talking about missions to other planets in their system. They're planning expeditions to their 4th planet, Yelneth reported. Mars, they call it. Their plans show permanent settlements within 50 years. Council protocols were clear. No species was allowed to establish permanent settlements beyond their home planet without Council approval. It was a rule that had been enforced for millennia. Species that tried to expand too quickly often became threats to galactic stability. Their psychology profiles, Zexthara said. What did they tell us? Ulaneth hesitated. That's what concerns me most. Every species we've studied shows the same basic patterns. They want safety, comfort, predictability. Humans are different. They actively seek out danger. They explore unknown places not because they need to, but because those places are unknown. They take risks that any rational species would avoid. The chamber fell silent. Even Mordak's tentacles stopped moving as he considered this information. They have a word, Ulaneth continued. Wanderlust. It means the desire to travel and explore simply for the sake of exploration. We've never encountered a species with this trait so deeply embedded in their nature. Zexthara felt something she rarely experienced, uncertainty. In 10,000 years of galactic management, the Council had developed protocols for every situation. Aggressive species were contained until they learned peace. Curious species were guided towards safe avenues of research. Expansionist species were given controlled territories to explore, but humans didn't fit any of these patterns. They were aggressive, but also capable of cooperation. They were curious, but also practical. They wanted to expand, but also showed concern for other life forms. They were a contradiction that the Council's models couldn't predict. They're launching another mission next month, Ulaneth reported. A probe to study the outer planets of their system. If it succeeds, they're planning crewed missions within 20 years. The Council had faced this decision point countless times before. A species was reaching beyond their home planet. Standard protocol demanded immediate but subtle intervention. Equipment failures, redirected research, key scientists suffering convenient accidents. It was all very clean and left no traces that couldn't be explained by natural causes. But something about humanity made Zexthara hesitate. Perhaps it was their unusual resilience or their habit of turning setbacks into innovations. Perhaps it was the way they seemed to grow stronger under pressure instead of weaker. What are your recommendations? She asked the assembled council. Standard containment protocol, Mordak replied immediately. We slow their development until we can properly evaluate them. It's worked for 10,000 years. But Ulaneth shook her head. I'm not sure that will work with humans. Every time they face an obstacle, they find a way around it. If we make space exploration harder, they might just develop better technology faster. Zexthara studied the human data one final time. Everything about this species suggested they would not accept limitations easily. But the alternative, allowing an unpredictable species to develop without guidance, was unthinkable. Begin standard containment protocol, she decided. But monitor them closely. If they show any signs of breaking through our interference, we reassess immediately. As the council session ended and the great beings dispersed to their duties, none of them realized they had just made the most important decision in galactic history. They were about to discover that some species don't break under pressure. Some species become something entirely new. Dr. Sarah Chun stared at the debris scattered across the launch pad. For the third time in 6 months, a critical mission had ended in disaster. The Mars probe that should have been halfway to the red planet was now twisted metal smoking in the Florida heat. Equipment failure, the investigators would report, just like the previous 2 times. Metal fatigue in the primary support structure. But Sarah had been studying the wreckage of all 3 failures. And the patterns were impossible to ignore. She pulled up the data on her tablet as she walked back toward the Space Center buildings. Each failure had struck at the exact moment when the mission was most critical. Each had involved materials that should have lasted decades. Each had destroyed months of work and set the space program back by years. Inside the main building, the mood was darker than Sarah had ever seen it. Engineers sat at their desks, staring at blank screens. Mission planners spoke in hushed voices about canceled projects and reduced budgets. The third failure had convinced the political leaders that maybe humanity wasn't ready for space exploration after all. But Sarah wasn't convinced. She was a data scientist, and data never lied. What she saw in the numbers told a very different story than what the official reports claimed. Dr. Chun? A young engineer named Marcus approached her desk. I've been running those calculations you asked for. The probability analysis of the failures. Sarah looked up from her tablet. Marcus had been working on this problem for weeks, trying to understand how 3 separate missions could fail in such similar ways. What did you find? Marcus glanced around nervously before sliding a data crystal across her desk. The chances of 3 random equipment failures happening exactly when they did? About 1 in 37 million. But that's not the weird part. What is? I ran the analysis on other space programs too. The Japanese lunar mission failed last month. The Europeans lost their asteroid probe 2 weeks ago. The Chinese Deep Space Telescope went dark yesterday. Dr. Chun, it's not just us. Every major space project on Earth has been hit by equipment failures in the past year. Sarah felt her stomach drop. One space agency having problems was understandable. Even 2 could be explained by budget cuts or technical challenges. But every major space program in the world experiencing critical failures at the same time? That wasn't possible unless someone was making it happen. Who else knows about this? She asked. Just us. But Dr. Chun, there's something else. I found patterns in the timing. The failures always happen right before major breakthroughs. The Japanese were about to test a new propulsion system. The Europeans had discovered something important in their asteroid data. Our Mars probe was carrying sensors that might have detected. Well, we'll never know now. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The implications were staggering. Someone or something was actively sabotaging human space exploration. But who? And why? The answer came to her during a late-night video conference with Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Japanese Space Agency and Dr. Alina Volkov from the European program. All 3 women had noticed the same patterns in their respective failures. It's too coordinated, Alina said, her voice tired through the encrypted connection. Someone with access to all our programs would need intelligence capabilities beyond any nation on Earth. What if it's not a nation? Yuki asked quietly. What if it's not from Earth at all? The question hung in the air like an unspoken fear that none of them wanted to acknowledge. But Sarah had been thinking the same thing for weeks. The precision of the failures, the timing, the global coordination. It all pointed to an intelligence far more advanced than anything humanity possessed. We need to test this theory, Sarah said finally. But we can't use official channels. If something is watching our space programs, it's probably watching our communications too. Within a month, a secret network had formed. Scientists and engineers from around the world began sharing data through hidden channels. They called themselves the Underground Railroad, a reference to the hidden network that had once helped slaves escape to freedom. Now they were trying to help humanity escape the bonds that were keeping them trapped on Earth. What they discovered was both terrifying and inspiring. The evidence was overwhelming. Every time humanity made a significant step towards space exploration, that step was deliberately undermined. But the Underground Railroad also discovered something their hidden enemy had not expected. Each failure made human technology better. Not worse that the destroyed Mars probe led to improvements in structural engineering. The failed lunar mission drove innovations in propulsion systems. The lost asteroid probe inspired new approaches to deep space communication. Each setback forced human engineers to think differently, to find new solutions, to push the boundaries of what was possible. Sarah realized this was what made humanity different. Other species might have given up after the first few failures. They would have accepted that space travel was too dangerous or too difficult. But humans responded to failure by working harder, thinking smarter, and refusing to accept limitations. "We're being tested," she told the secret gathering of Underground Railroad members who met in an abandoned warehouse outside Houston. "Something out there is pushing us, seeing if we'll break. But every time they knock us down, we get back up stronger." Dr. Tanaka nodded from her video screen. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Sarah had been thinking about this for weeks. The answer was both simple and terrifying. "We stop playing by their rules," she said. "Whatever is interfering with our space program expects us to follow predictable patterns. Launch missions from known sites using standard technology. We need to think like they do, but do the opposite." The plan that emerged was unlike anything in the history of space exploration. Instead of big, public missions that could be easily monitored and sabotaged, they would develop small, secret projects in hidden locations. Instead of following traditional technology paths, they would explore completely new approaches to space travel. The breakthrough came from Dr. Volkov's team, working in a converted mine shaft in Siberia. They had been experimenting with quantum field manipulation, a technology so new that no one outside the team even understood what they were trying to achieve. "We've done it." Elena's excited voice came through the encrypted channel. "Not space travel, something better. We figured out how to transmit information instantaneously across any distance using quantum entanglement." Sarah felt her heart race. Instantaneous communication across space meant they could coordinate missions that no external intelligence could predict or interfere with. But more importantly, it meant humanity had just discovered a technology that should have been impossible with their current level of development. "How?" Sarah asked. "By giving up on the idea that space and time work the way we thought they did," Elena replied. "We've been thinking too small. The universe isn't just matter and energy. It's information. And information doesn't follow the same rules that matter does." Within weeks, the Underground Railroad was using quantum communication to coordinate projects across the globe. Teams in hidden locations began developing technologies that broke every rule of conventional physics. They weren't just building better rockets anymore. They were discovering that reality itself could be manipulated by beings who understood its true nature. The hidden enemy's interference had backfired completely. By forcing humanity to work in secret, by making them find new ways around every obstacle, they had accelerated human development far beyond what would have been possible under normal circumstances. Sarah realized the irony as she stood in the converted mine shaft, watching Dr. Volkov's quantum communication array receive its first message from a sister facility in Australia. Humanity had been held back from reaching the stars through conventional means. So they had learned to reach the stars in ways that transcended convention entirely. The real question was no longer whether humanity would reach space. The question was what they would become once they got there. Observer Yelena stared at the impossible data flowing across her screens in disbelief. For the past 6 months, the Council's containment protocol had been working perfectly. Every major human space mission had failed exactly as planned. The species should have given up by now, turning their attention to safer pursuits like art or philosophy. Instead, the readings she was getting from Earth made no sense at all. "Arbiter Zexthara," she called urgently. "You need to see this immediately." The great being materialized in the observation chamber, her 6 eyes showing the irritation of someone interrupted from important work. "Has the containment failed? Are the humans launching new missions?" "No," Yelena said, her voice barely steady. "They're not launching anything. But according to our deep space sensors, there are human quantum signatures in 47 different star systems." Zexthara's eyes focused with laser intensity. "That's impossible. We've been monitoring every human space facility. They haven't successfully launched a single mission beyond their moon in over a year. That's what I thought too. But look at this. Yelena pulled up a three-dimensional map of local space. Glowing dots marked human activity spreading out from Earth like ripples in a pond. The signatures are weak, but they're definitely human. Somehow, they're reaching these systems without using ships at all. The Arbiter moved closer to the displays, her advanced mind racing through possibilities. The Council's science could detect the unique quantum signature of any sapient species across vast distances. It was how they tracked the development of civilizations throughout the galaxy. But these readings suggested humans were somehow existing in multiple places simultaneously. Show me the source signals from Earth. Zexthara commanded. Yelena switched to real-time observations of the human home planet. What she saw defied everything she understood about technological development. Instead of the large, obvious facilities that characterize normal space programs, Earth was covered with thousands of small installations that barely registered on their sensors. They're not building rockets, Yelena reported. They're building something else entirely. Some kind of quantum manipulation network. On the screens, hidden facilities across Earth hummed with activity. In converted mines, abandoned warehouses, and underground bunkers, human scientists were working on projects that shouldn't have been possible for a species at their level of development. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in what had once been a coal mine in West Virginia, now converted into humanity's first quantum consciousness laboratory. Around her, machines that looked more like art installations than scientific equipment manipulated the fundamental forces of reality itself. Ready for the first test? Asked Dr. Tanaka, whose team had arrived from Japan via quantum transport 3 days earlier. The journey that should have taken 14 hours had been completed instantaneously, through a process that broke every law of physics Sarah had learned in school. Sarah nodded, though her heart was racing. What they were about to attempt had never been tried by any species in recorded galactic history. They weren't just going to send information or matter across space. They were going to send consciousness itself. The volunteer was Marcus, the young engineer who had first discovered the patterns in the equipment failures. He lay connected to the quantum consciousness array, his brain patterns being mapped and encoded into pure information. Remember, Dr. Volkov said from her facility in Siberia, her voice coming through quantum communication. Don't try to think like a human when you're in the quantum state. You'll exist as pure information. You can be in multiple places at once, experience time differently, interact with reality at the fundamental level. Marcus smiled weakly. So basically, don't think like anything I've ever experienced before. Got it. The process began with a sound like singing crystals. Marcus's body remained in the chamber, but his consciousness was encoded into quantum information and transmitted instantaneously to a sister facility on the dark side of the moon. For 3 minutes, Marcus existed in 2 places at once, his body in West Virginia and his awareness in a lunar laboratory. When he returned, his eyes held a look that Sarah had never seen before. Wonder mixed with understanding, as if he had glimpsed something fundamental about the nature of existence itself. It works, he said simply, but it's more than we thought. When you're in the quantum state, you can perceive the information structure that underlies reality. Space and time aren't barriers. They're just different ways of organizing information. Within weeks, the Underground Railroad had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Human consciousness could now exist as distributed information networks spanning multiple star systems. They weren't traveling to other planets. They were becoming present in other star systems through quantum manifestation. Observer Yelena watched in growing alarm as her sensors detected human activity throughout local space. Not ships or colonies, but something far more disturbing, human consciousness. Networks that could manipulate matter and energy through direct quantum interaction. They're not just exploring space, she reported to an emergency council session. They're becoming space, existing as information patterns that can manifest anywhere in the galaxy instantaneously. Arbiter Zexthar felt something she had never experienced in her millennia of existence: true fear. The Council's power had always rested on their control of space travel and advanced technology. But humans had discovered something that transcended both. "Show me their Earth," she commanded. The view that appeared made her understand the true scope of what had happened. Earth itself was changing. The planet's quantum signature was becoming stronger, more complex. Instead of a simple world inhabited by biological creatures, Earth was transforming into something that existed simultaneously in normal space and in the quantum information dimensions that humans had learned to access. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the central chamber of the global quantum consciousness network. Around her, holographic displays showed human awareness spreading throughout the galaxy like a benevolent infection. Teams of consciousness explorers were making contact with other developing species, sharing knowledge without the paternalistic control that the Council exercised. "We've found them," reported Marcus, whose consciousness had been exploring the galactic core. "The ones who've been interfering with our development. They call themselves the Galactic Oversight Council." Sarah felt a mixture of anger and understanding. "Are they hostile?" "Not hostile," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had touched the fundamental structure of reality. "Afraid. They've been controlling galactic development for thousands of years. And we represent something they can't control or understand." Dr. Tanaka, manifesting in the chamber through quantum projection from her facility in Japan, added her observations. "I've been studying their methods. They keep species contained by limiting their development to predictable paths. But we broke out of those paths entirely." Sarah realized the profound irony of their situation. The Council's interference had forced humanity to abandon conventional development and discover something far more powerful: the ability to transcend physical limitations entirely. By trying to contain human expansion, they had catalyzed human evolution beyond anything previously imagined. "What do we do now?" asked Dr. Volkov, her consciousness joining the discussion. From multiple locations, simultaneously, Sarah looked around at her. Colleagues, brilliant minds who had learned to exist as pure thought while maintaining their individual identities. Around them, the Earth hummed with quantum energy as millions of humans began to explore their new capabilities. "We do what humans have always done when we encounter something greater than ourselves," Sarah said. "We learn from it, and then we become something even greater." High above Earth, in the Council's observation station, Yelneth watched as the last human facilities shut down. But the quantum signatures weren't disappearing. They were expanding. Humanity was abandoning physical existence entirely, becoming something that existed in the spaces between spaces. In the information patterns that connected all things, the containment had failed so completely that the word failure no longer applied. Humanity hadn't just broken free of the Council's control. They had evolved beyond the need for control entirely. And across the galaxy, other young species were beginning to detect the quantum whispers of human knowledge, offering them a choice between the Council's careful guidance and something infinitely more dangerous and wonderful. The age of human oversight was about to begin. The Council fleet approached Earth in formation, their ships gleaming like jewels against the darkness of space. Arbiter Zexthara stood on the bridge of the lead vessel, her 6 eyes fixed on the blue planet that had become the center of their greatest crisis. "All sensors show the same reading," reported Fleet Commander Torvash. "No human quantum signatures on the planet's surface. No spacecraft in orbit. No active communication networks. By all measurements, Earth appears to be empty. Zexthara felt her stomach turn cold. Empty planets were not unknown in galactic history, but they were always the result of extinction events or species that had destroyed themselves through war or environmental collapse. The quantum readings from the past months had suggested humanity was transcending physical existence, but she had hoped they were wrong. "Take us into orbit," she commanded. "Prepare investigation teams." As their ship descended toward Earth's atmosphere, the planet below revealed its secrets slowly. The great human cities still stood, their buildings intact and lights still burning. Vast agricultural areas showed crops growing in perfect geometric patterns. Transportation networks hummed with automated vehicles moving in precise coordination, but there were no humans anywhere. "It's like they just vanished," whispered observer Yelena as their shuttle descended toward the surface. "Everything they built is still here, still functioning, but they're gone." The investigation team landed in what had once been New York City. As they stepped out of their shuttle, protected by environmental suits and surrounded by scanning equipment, they found themselves in a world that felt more like a carefully maintained museum than an abandoned ruin. The streets were clean, almost pristine. Gardens bloomed with flowers that grew in mathematical spirals too perfect to be natural. Buildings maintained themselves through systems that seemed to operate on principles the Council's science couldn't explain. Water flowed through fountains that drew their energy from quantum fluctuations in local spacetime. "These systems," muttered Chief Scientist Kellever as she studied a self-repairing streetlight. "They're manipulating matter at the subatomic level. This isn't technology. It's direct control over the fundamental forces of reality." Zexthara walked through the empty streets with growing unease. This wasn't the aftermath of a species fleeing their planet or dying out. This was the careful arrangement of a world left behind by beings who no longer needed physical space to exist. They found the first message in Central Park, where a quantum beacon had been placed among flowers that bloomed in impossible colors. The message played in perfect council language, though no human should have known their communication protocols. "Greetings to the Galactic Oversight Council. We are no longer where you can reach us, but we leave this record for your understanding. Thank you for teaching us that we were capable of more than we imagined." The investigation team exchanged glances. The message was polite, but carried an unmistakable edge. The humans knew exactly who had been interfering with their development. Over the following days, the council teams explored human civilization's remains across the globe. What they found defied every assumption they had made about technological development done in Geneva. They discovered the underground facility that had once housed humanity's first quantum consciousness laboratory. The equipment had been left perfectly preserved, along with detailed documentation of the transcendence process. The files were written in simple language, as if intended for species just beginning to explore consciousness manipulation. "They left instructions," reported Yelena, her voice barely steady. "Complete technical specifications for achieving consciousness transcendence. Any species capable of understanding quantum mechanics could follow these steps." Zexthara felt a chill of genuine terror. The Council's control over galactic civilization had always rested on their monopoly on advanced technologies. They guided younger species slowly, carefully, ensuring that no civilization developed too quickly or in unexpected directions. But humans had not only broken free of that control, they had documented exactly how they did it and left the information for other species to find out in the former CERN facility in Switzerland. They found humanity's greatest gift and most dangerous legacy, a crystalline matrix the size of a building, humming with quantum energy that made their best sensors struggle to function. "It's a consciousness interface," explained Kellever after hours of careful study. Any being that connects with it will experience the complete process of human transcendence. They'll understand not just the technical aspects, but the philosophical and evolutionary changes required. Is it safe? Asked Dextara. That depends on your definition of safe, Kelva replied. It won't harm the user physically, but experiencing human transcendence would fundamentally change any consciousness that touches it. They would never be the same afterward. As the investigation continued, a disturbing pattern emerged. The humans had left similar facilities on every continent, each one containing the complete knowledge needed for consciousness transcendence. More than that, they had left detailed studies of other species throughout the galaxy, including psychological profiles that showed exactly how each civilization might achieve their own version of transcendence. They studied us, Yelena reported during an emergency communication with the Council station. Not just humans, but every species in the galactic community. They understand our psychology, our social structures, our technological capabilities. And they've left specific instructions for how each species could transcend their current limitations. The implications were staggering. The Council's careful control of galactic development could be undone if any species discovered humanity's legacy. Worse, the quantum signatures they had been detecting suggested that humanity was actively spreading this knowledge to other developing civilizations. Across the galaxy, in the depths of an underground facility in Australia, they found the final piece of the puzzle. A vast chamber filled with quantum manipulation equipment that still hummed with power. Connected to networks that stretched across the planet and beyond. At the center of the chamber was a simple message, inscribed in crystalline letters that glowed with their own light. To the Council, your age of guidance is ending. We offer no challenge to your authority over those who choose to remain as they are. But for those who wish to become more than they were, we offer a different path. The universe is vast enough for many forms of consciousness to flourish. Choose wisely. Commander Tarvesh studied the readings from his instruments with growing alarm. Arbiter, the quantum signatures we detected throughout this facility. They're not residual energy from past activities. These systems are still active, still connected to something. As if responding to his words, the chamber filled with a gentle light. Holographic images appeared, showing views from across the galaxy. Young civilizations the Council had been monitoring were suddenly displaying impossible technological advances. Species that should have taken centuries to develop space travel were building quantum communication networks overnight. They're teaching them, Zexthara said, understanding flooding through her. Humanity hasn't abandoned the galaxy. They've become its new teachers. The recording showed human consciousness patterns appearing near developing civilizations, sharing knowledge, offering guidance without control. Unlike the Council's careful management of technological development, humanity was simply providing information and allowing each species to choose their own path. On the viewing screens, the Jalkari species was building consciousness transfer networks similar to humanity's early experiments. The aquatic Morden had developed distributed intelligence patterns that allowed their entire species to think as one while maintaining individual identity. Dozens of other civilizations were beginning to display the cooperative transcendence, patterns that had marked humanity's evolution. "Stop the recordings," Zexthara commanded, her voice heavy with the weight of understanding that the truth was worse than she had feared. Humanity hadn't just escaped the Council's control. They had become the Council's replacement. But where the Council had controlled through limitation and guidance, humanity was teaching through example and free choice. The investigation team returned to their ships in silence, carrying data that would change everything the Council understood about galactic civilization. As they prepared to leave Earth's orbit, one final message appeared on their communication systems. The choice is yours, as it has always been. You can continue as guardians of limitation, or you can become guides toward transcendence. We will respect whatever path you choose, but we will not be bound by it. Zexthar stared at the empty earth below them as their ships departed. The humans were gone, but their legacy was spreading across the galaxy like a wildfire of consciousness and possibility. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Oversight Council was no longer the supreme authority over galactic civilization, and they were only just beginning to understand what that meant. 6 months after the discovery of empty Earth, the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never been more crowded or more divided. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the crystalline galleries, their voices creating a chaos of sound that would have been impossible to manage. Just a year earlier, Arbiter Zexthara stood at the central podium, her 6 eyes surveying the unprecedented gathering. For the first time in galactic history, young species were demanding representation in council deliberations. The careful hierarchy that had maintained order for 10 millennia was crumbling before her eyes. "Order!" she called, her voice amplified by systems that should have commanded instant silence. Instead, the noise continued as species that had never been allowed to speak in council chambers refused to be quiet. Ambassador Kreshta of the Gelkri rose from her designated position. Her species had been under council observation for only 50 years, far too young to warrant a voice in galactic affairs under normal protocols. But these were no longer normal times. "Honored Arbiter," Kreshta began, her translator rendering her clicking speech into standard galactic. "My people have received the human knowledge transmissions. We have learned to transcend individual consciousness while maintaining personal identity. We no longer require council guidance to develop safely." A rumble of agreement rose from dozens of other young species. The Mordan ambassador gestured with tentacles that moved in perfectly synchronized patterns, clear evidence that their entire delegation was thinking as one coordinated intelligence. The crystalline Vexmari chimed in harmonious tones that created complex, mathematical patterns in the air around them. "This is precisely the danger we warned about," interjected Keeper Mordak from his position on the council platform. "Unguided development leads to chaos. These species are abandoning proven paths of evolution for experimental techniques that could destroy them." But observer Yeleneth, who had been studying the reports from across the galaxy, stood to address the assembly. In the months since discovering humanity's legacy, she had been documenting the unprecedented changes sweeping through galactic civilization. "Respectfully, Keeper Mordock, the evidence suggests otherwise," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Every species that has implemented human transcendence techniques has shown remarkable stability and cooperation. Crime rates have dropped to near zero. Resource conflicts have ended as species learn to exist in quantum states that require no physical materials. Most significantly, not a single transcended species has shown aggressive tendencies toward their neighbors." The data she presented painted a picture that challenged everything the Council believed about uncontrolled development. Species that should have become dangerous were instead becoming more peaceful. Civilizations that should have been competing for resources were collaborating in ways the Council had never imagined possible. They're sharing consciousness patterns across entire star systems. Yeleneth continued. The Gelkri have formed cooperative networks with 6 other species in their region. The Morden have established distributed intelligence connections with civilizations they've never physically met. They're creating a galactic community based on understanding rather than control. In the gallery, the young species listened with growing confidence. They had tasted freedom from the Council's careful limitations, and they were not willing to give it up. But the most disturbing reports came from the Council's own monitoring stations. Human consciousness patterns were appearing throughout the galaxy with increasing frequency, not as invaders or conquerors, but as teachers and guides who offered knowledge freely and departed. When their lessons were complete, the humans have established contact with 47 developing civilizations in the past month alone, reported Fleet Commander Torvash. They're teaching quantum consciousness manipulation to any species that expresses interest. They make no demands, establish no bases, and leave no permanent presence. They simply share knowledge and allow each species to choose their own path. Zexthara felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Everything the Council had built over 10,000 years was being dismantled by a species that had transcended physical existence entirely. But the most troubling aspect wasn't the challenge to Council authority, it was how appealing the alternative appeared to be. The session was interrupted by an unexpected transmission that appeared on every communication device in the assembly. The signal was coming from somewhere beyond normal space-time, carrying the distinctive quantum signature of human consciousness. "Greetings to the Galactic Council and all assembled beings," the voice said in perfect galactic standard. "We are the collective consciousness of humanity, speaking from the quantum dimensions we now call home. We wish to share information that may be relevant to your current discussions." The assembly fell silent. This was the first direct communication from humanity since their transcendence. "We have been exploring the deep archives of galactic history, studying the records left by previous transcendent civilizations. We have discovered something that the current Council leadership may not be aware of." Holographic displays filled the air above the assembly, showing star maps and data archives that dated back millions of years. The information was encoded in languages and symbols that predated the current galactic civilization. The Galactic Oversight Council was not originally designed to control younger species. The human voice continued. It was established as a temporary caretaker organization by the galaxy's previous transcendent civilization, a species called the Gardeners, who evolved beyond physical existence. Approximately 1 million years ago, Zexthara felt her world shift beneath her feet. The human records showed archives that the Council had lost access to millennia ago, containing the original charter of galactic oversight. The Council's purpose was to protect and guide developing civilizations until humanity matured enough to take over the role of cosmic gardeners. The interference with human development was never part of the original plan. It was a deviation that occurred when the Council leadership forgot their true mission and began to see control as an end rather than a means. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. The Council hadn't been the ultimate authority in galactic civilization. They had been temporary caretakers, waiting for humanity to evolve enough to take over their role. "We offer no judgment of the current Council's actions," the human voice continued with what sounded almost like compassion. "The burden of guiding galactic civilization for 1 million years would challenge any species. But the time has come for the original plan to resume." The holographic displays showed the complete history of galactic civilization, with cycles of transcendent species, helping younger ones evolve until they too became gardeners of cosmic development. Humanity was simply the latest in a chain of evolution that stretched back to the galaxy's earliest days. Every species in this assembly has the potential to transcend their current limitations, the human consciousness explained. "The choice is yours to make freely. We will provide knowledge and guidance to those who seek it, but we will never force evolution on those who prefer their current state of existence." As the transmission ended, the assembly sat in stunned silence. The revelation that the Council had been operating outside their original mandate for millennia changed everything about the galactic power structure. But what happened next surprised even Zexthara. Instead of chaos or rebellion, a calm discussion began to emerge. Species that had been enemies for centuries began talking about cooperation. Council members who had opposed change started asking questions about transcendence techniques. Yelneth approached the podium and looked out at the assembly. In her 3 centuries of service, she had never imagined this moment was possible. The human records show that the choice between limitation and transcendence has been offered to every galactic civilization throughout history, she announced. Some species chose to remain as they were and were protected and honored for their decision. Others chose to evolve beyond their physical limitations and became gardeners for the next generation of developing civilizations. She paused, allowing the weight of this choice to settle over the assembly. For the first time in 1,000,000 years, that choice is being offered freely again. Not as a council decision or a species mandate, but as an individual choice available to every consciousness in the galaxy. Over the following days, as the assembly continued its unprecedented session, the true scope of the transformation became clear. Species weren't just choosing between council control and human guidance. They were choosing between fundamentally different ways of existing in the universe. Some civilizations chose to remain in their current form, content with the familiar limitations of physical existence. The council, humbled by the discovery of their original purpose, began to adapt their methods to provide protection and guidance without the controlling oversight that had characterized their recent history. That other species chose to explore consciousness transcendence, working with human teachers to discover their own unique paths to evolution beyond physical limitations. But the most remarkable development was the emergence of mixed communities.